Warhammer Skulls 2026 has premiered, which means we have a pretty good idea of what the next year of Warhammer 40k gaming is going to look like. Darktide, Space Marine 2, and Rogue Trader are all continuing to be updated with fresh content, while new games like Dawn of War 4 have had their release date revealed, and others like Mechanicus 2 have just outright stealth dropped. Let's dive right into the biggest reveals at Skulls this year, starting with Mechanicus 2, which I've completely fallen in love with, and this is a surprise because I don't typically enjoy tactical games. I typically stick to games with really good, fast-paced combat systems like Darktide or Space Marine 2. But Mechanicus 2 has been extremely satisfying to play through so far, and the great thing is it's not like the original Mechanicus at all. These are basically completely different games. It's like going from Dawn of War to Dawn of War 2. So I can go back and play either and have plenty of replayability for both kinds of experiences. And speaking of Dawn of War 4 is officially releasing on September 17th, followed by what looks like a pretty steady stream of updates to the game. These updates range from new characters in the Last Stand game mode to entirely different campaigns like the Crusade campaign structure, which looks a lot like the Dark Crusade or Soulstorm campaigns from the original game. The most promising release for Dawn of War 4 in its post-launch support window looks to be the Aftermath expansion, which is going to expand the campaign even further and introduce a new faction. Judging by the black and gold that we're seeing here, it's probably going to be Chaos, probably going to be Black Legion. And speaking of post-launch support, we may as well talk about Darktide, Space Marine 2, and Rogue Trader. Starting with Darktide, the game is finally getting a long-awaited Adeptus Mechanicus type class in the form of the Skitarii, which is releasing on June 23rd. On the surface, the Skitarii look really exciting to play because they introduce all of their iconic weapons, such as arc weapons, phosphor blasters, and transonic blades. But if you dive a little deeper, it looks like Fat Shark is trying to make the class fill a couple of different roles in the game: melee DPS, range DPS, and potentially even more of a caster niche, which hasn't really been a thing introduced in Darktide since the Psyker. Next up, we have Space Marine 2, which introduced its own stealth drop in the form of a new update. The update delivers a new operation, it revamps siege mode, and it introduces 3 new heroic weapons and all sorts of additional cosmetics to the game. Overall, it's a pretty simple update, but Space Marine 2 players like simple. We just want more things to unlock, more things to chase and grind for, and more of that is always good. But nobody does more content better than Owlcat, who is behind Rogue Trader and Dark Heresy. The next expansion for Rogue Trader, the Infinite Mission, releases on June 11th, and it's going to introduce a lot of endgame or Act 5 content, which the game desperately needs. And as for Dark Heresy, we don't have an official release date yet, but the game has just entered its beta phase, and it's developing quite nicely. Dark Heresy is supposed to be the successor of Rogue Trader, and that it's going to be taking a lot of the game mechanics introduced in Rogue Trader and building upon them. And the final game that's been receiving a lot of post-launch support that I want to talk about today is Warhammer 40k Speed Freaks. Speed Freaks has received a ton of updates to how the game plays, the customization of the cars, the orcs, and of the various maps, and even introduced a map editor for the community to experiment with. The game is cross-platform, it's got a banging soundtrack, and it's very visually appealing, at least for me. But according to a lot of the metrics that we can measure, Speed Freaks doesn't seem like it's doing too hot. Not a lot of people are playing the game. I plan on diving into the game just to see for myself why it may not be doing so hot, so make sure that you subscribe and stick around for that. But the more 40k fans that I interact with, the more I've developed this theory that people don't actually want to play as Xenos races in games that are all about Xenos. So the game could be the hottest thing in the combat racing genre since Twisted Metal, but even if that's the case, it's not going to attract 40k fans because many 40k fans simply just don't care for orcs. And I think that this is why, even in a game like Battle Sector, which has just released the Ultramarines as a playable faction, many of the playable factions present in these games are going to be based on the Imperium. These developers understand that most people are looking for an experience where they could play as a human fighting against Xenos and demons in this grimdark setting. Anyways, aside from that rant, the last live service game to receive an update is Gladius, which released a pack that introduces 8 new units to various armies in the game. Additionally, up until May 28th, Gladius is actually free to keep on Steam, so get in there, claim the game, and try the game for yourself. I know I'm going to. That that wraps up most of the updates for a lot of the live service games without diving into mobile gaming territory. Of course, things like Warhammer Combat Cards or Tacticus are always going to receive tons of updates because they make tons and tons of money, but we don't have to dive into them here. Before we talk about the most exciting reveal of the entire event, I want to quickly talk about Warhammer Survivors and Bolt Gun 2, which both have demos available on Steam right now. Warhammer Survivors is a Vampire Survivors-esque game, but with Warhammer Age of Sigmar and Warhammer 40k characters and weapons. This game has been on my radar for a while, and it's really exciting that the game is going to be coming to mobile because that's primarily how I engage with the Vampire Survivors. As for Warhammer Survivors and Bolt Gun 2 having playable demos on Steam, this is a very classic way to advertise a pair of very classic type games. Both of these games either feel like something that you would play in an arcade or engage with in a very retro style, like for example how Bolt Gun 2 is effectively just Doom but with a Warhammer skin on it. But what has to be the absolutely most exciting reveal of all of Warhammer Skulls 2026, which is so fitting because this is the 10th anniversary of Warhammer Skulls, is Chaos Gate Deathwatch. As I stated earlier in this video, I'm typically not a fan of tactical games unless there's some kind of hook or dynamic replayability in the game, and Deathwatch looks like it's going to be introducing a ton of factions right off the bat, and more factions means more enemy variety, which means that you can't just tackle every single problem in the same way. You've got to be pretty creative with how you deal with every kind of situation and every kind of enemy. My biggest criticism of the Chaos Gate series is that typically whenever you establish a build for your squad or your characters, you tackle a lot of the game's combat scenarios in a very linear manner. It's all very samey. Outside of the boss fights, especially in Chaos Gate Demon Hunters, the boss fights actually did a pretty good job of challenging you to play differently. But with all these Xenos factions being in Chaos Gate Deathwatch right off the bat, I hope that that's not going to be a problem. Outside of all of the exciting new reveals and updates to the games that we love, one thing that was pretty concerning, or perhaps maybe I shouldn't be concerned about it at all, is that it seems like Warhammer 40k is doing more cross-collaboration with other IPs and franchises. For example, they revealed a Rust collaboration and a Helldivers 2 collaboration. And I know that this isn't anything new for Warhammer 40k. They've done collabs with games like Call of Duty in the past, and I understand that the purpose of these collaborations is to be able to market Warhammer 40k to audiences that otherwise wouldn't have had any exposure to the franchise at all. But Warhammer 40k has a certain reputation or integrity, and the last thing that I would want to see is for one of these collabs to portray Warhammer 40k in a very goofy way and potentially damage that reputation. Maybe I'm overthinking it, but I've seen plenty of other franchises such as Warcraft or Star Wars get completely Disneyfied into oblivion to the point where those two franchises just aren't appealing to me anymore. Either way, let me know what you think about the current state of Warhammer 40k video games in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hype up this video. All of your support really means a lot to me. As always, this has been Mechanicus, the Emperor Protects.